I know many of our listeners are familiar with clean energy tax credit transferability, or at least have heard of it. It's quickly becoming a key tool for helping developers finance their projects, but for distributed generation projects like C&I, commercial, industrial, or community solar, transferring tax credits is still a major challenge. Finding buyers open to smaller amounts is tough, transaction costs are high, and tax credit recapture insurance is inaccessible in most cases. That's why I wanted to share a little bit more about a company that I had a chance to interview at the end of last year, Concentro. The founders, Inigo and Tao, are really revolutionizing the way the DJ developers can leverage transferability, focusing on $1 million to $30 million transactions. Concentro takes a hands-on tailored approach to make the transfer process seamless and accessible for both buyers and sellers. They connect projects to buyers, handle all the due diligence, bundle projects to get economies of scale, and manage the entire transaction from start to finish. They've built exciting AI technology to streamline the diligence process for sub-utility scale projects. For buyers, whether individuals or corporations, Concentro offers access to fully vetted insured tax credits, helping them reduce their tax liability in a seamless way. For developers, Concentro's unique model generates higher net prices even after fees, making it a game changer for DG developers. So if you're looking for a better, more efficient way to buy or sell clean energy tax credits, I highly recommend you check them out. You could learn more about them. We'll also have it on the notes of the podcast. Their website is www.concentro.io. Thank you, Concentro, for sponsoring this episode of the Solar Maverick Podcast. Let's get into it. This is Benoy, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast. I'm thrilled to announce that we'll be releasing our 200th episode during the week of February 24th. A huge thank you to our amazing listeners, our Mavericks, for your continued support in making this journey possible. Coincidentally, this milestone falls during Intersolar in San Diego, making it a perfect opportunity to celebrate. We're excited to host a special party to mark the occasion, and even more importantly, will serve as a fundraiser to support those affected by the devastating fires in Los Angeles, something that has personally impacted many of my friends and colleagues. If you're interested in joining us, the event will take place on February 25th from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. in the Gaslamp District near the San Diego Convention Center. You can find the RSVP link in the podcast show notes. Let's get into it.
With the advancements in AI, it's becoming much, much more useful and gives you a platform to be able to make some very, very intelligent decisions based on historical data. As an example, monitoring temperature inside of an inverter, also monitoring ambient temperature, and you're monitoring outputs and inputs to that inverter. It takes an extreme amount of time and a very, very thoughtful individual to be able to process all that. With AI and the ability to process all this information very, very quickly, you now have the tools to be able to have a system look into this data and anticipate those types of trends very, very fast.
Hello and welcome to the Solar Maverick Podcast, where solar meets entrepreneurship and experience. I'm your host, Benoy Thanjan, so let's get into it.
Hi, this is Benoy, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast. I'm really excited on this episode of the podcast to have Chris Grablutz. He's the principal and co-founder of Triforce Energy. They're a commercial and utility solar inspection, testing, and maintenance company that predominantly focuses on New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. And Chris, I'm really excited to have you on the podcast. Thank you for making time. This is now going to be your third interview on the Solar Maverick Podcast, and I really appreciate it. We're almost at 200 episodes, and you're one of our first episode 7, and now we're almost at 200, which is amazing. And I think, Chris, it would be great if you could tell us about Triforce Energy.
Yeah, thank you, Benoy. I appreciate being back on. It's been fantastic to see where the Solar Maverick has evolved to, and the audience that it reaches started quite a few years ago and back in the single digits, and now 200 is a major milestone. So thank you for the opportunity again to be on. To give everyone a snapshot and introduction to Triforce Energy, we're a New Jersey-based technical field services company. We serve the C&I solar market here in the Northeast and also expanding into the Mid-Atlantic regions. Our teams consist of really highly skilled technicians that provide a variety of inspections, testing, and maintenance services for both solar and energy storage projects.
That's amazing. Like obviously O&M is a very important part of the project life cycle. And I'm going to actually, Chris, have the links to the 2 other episodes of the podcast that you were on, which was episode 7, Getting Down to Earth with Solar, Construction Quality Control and O&M Insights from Chris Grablutz. And then episode 42, which was our summer solstice event several years ago. We did a live event, which was our first live event, How Solar Technology is Changing the World. We'll have the links to those podcasts. I was telling Chris earlier, I re-listened to both of those podcasts, and it still applies to today, even though these interviews, like the episode 7 was 2018, and I was surprised how much it applies to today. And, Chris, it would be great if people heard about your background. I mean, you're one of the few people whose whole career has been in solar. And I think, obviously people could listen to the interview, but it would be very helpful for them to know like your experience and then how you got to starting your own O&M company. And now it's been 3 years in business, or?
We're in our 3rd year of business.
Congratulations.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I started right out of college in the solar industry. Prior to starting as a professional, after graduating, I did some internships in the solar industry. I had the unique opportunity of learning about it during my physics coursework in undergraduate school, and I had to select private research to go into as part of my advanced coursework. And there was an opportunity to continue some studies on transparent solar cells and how they can be leveraged in things like thin film coatings. So if you think of a large skyscraper, all those southern facing windows are typically glazed in order to cut down the UV that comes in the building and reduced cooling costs during the summer. And thinking about the opportunity of integrating solar cells into all those windows and actually capturing energy from them and also cutting down the UV and creating a shading effect was very, very interesting to me. I really enjoyed the thought of building integrated photovoltaics. So I did that research, got the bug going, and a close family friend was working at a small company in the Bay Area that was doing commercial and residential solar thermal and solar energy system packages called Schuco USA out of the East Bay area. And so gentleman Dan Retz took me under his wing out there, and I spent the summer applying some of my AutoCAD background in drafting. And after that summer in the Bay Area, I knew this was the industry I was going to go into. And this is right around 2007, 2008. So as the financial world is crumbling, New Jersey's solar market was exploding. And so it all kind of lined up very well. And, I think I was one of the fortunate ones in 2010 joining the professional working world to have a lot of opportunity to start that career while others were still battling to get into other professions as we were kind of recovering from the housing market crash. So I got into the industry, worked at a company, an EPC in northern New Jersey, Reneu Energy, as a design engineer. I had the pleasure of working under then the director of project management and engineering, Rick Ivins. He's since started a massive design engineering firm called Pure Power Engineering. Rick started that business in Hoboken. I rejoined with Rick and under the umbrella of PV Pros, continued to expand from project engineering into construction and project management, learned operations, and then New Jersey ended up slowing down quite a bit. The SREC market got saturated, and so construction became very difficult as the number of projects really receded. And so it was a very challenging time, but pivoted the construction efforts of PV Pros at the time into technical field services. So, similar to what I do today, when that evolution of designing and building commercial projects, while building, you have to perform quality audits, you have to commission those systems, things break, you might have to go back and provide workmanship warranties. So we saw an opportunity of, hey, if the new projects aren't coming in as quickly, all the existing projects need to be serviced. So that pivot into technical field services as well as operations and maintenance started in, I believe, 2014, 15. And, just have ever since that point focused on, the quality aspects of the industry. And yeah, a great experience, and recognize that there was an opportunity to go out there and blaze some trails with Triforce Energy.
Yeah, that's an amazing background. I mean, you are the original Solar Maverick, and I can't believe you have 18 years, if you say, 2007 of solar experience. I mean, that's pretty impressive. And then, what is really interesting, which I've never asked you, but I've thought about it, is obviously you help Pure Power create PV Pros, which is very similar to what you're doing at Triforce Energy. What were the main things that you learned from working with Rick and then being at PV Pros that you think has helped you with Triforce Energy?
Yeah, I learned a lot, probably more than I can even recall or have time to talk about right now. But, I would say planning, preparation, systems, putting those things in place, having a plan of action before taking action is definitely one that sticks out and comes to me. More of the mindset of just considering all the factors of what goes into the work you're going to do, and then putting that down on paper, working collaboratively with a team, and then having the guts to go out there and do it. So, it was very much entrepreneurial role with the efforts over there, and, was afforded a lot of opportunity from Rick to expand that. And so it also was a fair share of learning from mistakes. And I think, that's probably most of the improvements or some of the best things that are implemented at Triforce come from some of the mistakes that were made early on, 8-10 years ago. And so learning from those mistakes, improving upon them, elevating them, and making sure that we recognize that there's a relationship between the company and the office, the folks that are in the field performing the work, and the clients, and how to balance those three things out is extremely, extremely important.
Yeah, definitely. Those are great learnings, and I appreciate you sharing with our audience. I was going to ask you, we always hear in the industry that solar projects are underperforming based on the original production.
Mm-hmm.
I think as someone who works in the O&M portion of the industry, is that true? And why is that the case?
Yeah, it's definitely true. Not just from my experience, but there's been a lot of independent research and public articles that have taken a vast amount of data from thousands of solar systems over the years to actually quantify that the average system does not meet its projections. And, I think a lot of that has to do with very aggressive projections to start with. So if you're expecting more power, or you're using a very generous weather climate data set that kind of shows hey, we're going to have a lot more sunny days than we averagely expect in an area, it's kind of hard to meet those expectations or projections right from the start. Those projections are created before the first panel is installed on the roof or on the ground or wherever the project may be. You've got a lot of other factors that go into the physical, the final design, the products that are procured, the construction means and methods. And then, I've really seen firsthand and embody is the way systems are operated. There's a short period of time, if you look at the overall lifespan of a solar asset, the EP&C, engineering, procurement, and construction process is a pretty small amount of time as you compare it to the 20 plus years of operating. So some things can happen in that EP&C phase that can impact shortfalls on the projection, but certainly you have a lot of time to make up for it over the operation phase, which is the majority of the lifespan.
That is really interesting to hear from your perspective. And that whole part about the using certain equipment over 20 years time and difference between the E and the P and the C, it's really interesting. And can you talk about some of examples of system performance, underperformance, and how you help system owners from avoiding?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing, or maybe the unique point of view that I see on this, there's a lot of factors. Projects can vary across different developers or installers on how they choose to deploy or the products they choose to select. But looking kind of across as a third-party service provider, it creates a unique advantage or vantage point to kind of see when issues are in silo to maybe one type of equipment or one method that a certain company deploys that other companies don't. And then you see trends that form across those silos. And so, those are the ones where the most people stand to benefit. And I think if you take a system and you kind of use a sound and accurate design for your generation model, your PV-Syst or helioscope, and you use a reasonable weather profile for modeling the climate that system has been designed to operate in, you now get down to how the equipment is taken care of, how it interacts with the grid, and how it's maintained. And, my learnings in the O&M space have been that the largest or the most common root cause for equipment downtime, which translates into lost energy, is workmanship related issues. And so you have equipment that wasn't installed properly, or the workmanship wasn't done in a long-term viewpoint. So it was kind of quickly done or not robustly done. And those fail at some point in time. They're failing a lot sooner, or they're experiencing a lot more wear and tear than you would have modeled or assumed in that initial projection. And so the workmanship related issues that start in construction that end up bleeding over into the operating phase are the most common root cause that we see and that I've seen out in the field that I think can really be avoided. There's a number of other things that I think system owners can also deploy to improve upon this. And, coming from the O&M perspective, I think that mindfulness when it comes to creating a maintenance plan and a maintenance budget is also an area where owners can take control over how much risk they want to avoid and how much risk they want to maybe defer. And so, we try to help system owners understand what the denominator is on requirements for maintaining equipment based on industry requirements, best practices, as well as the manufacturer's requirements to maintain their warranties, and say, this is what we need to do, and over here is what we should do, and over here is what we want to do. And by looking at the shoulds and the wants of a maintenance plan, that allows us to actively take risk management into our hands and be able to control things a little bit more and defer some of that risk, or avoid deferring some of that risk that could, instead of being a small issue, bubble over and become a larger issue, which could mean more downtime or more operating costs to, instead of repair something, now you're replacing it because it's a larger failure.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And do you get involved earlier in the process, helping an EPC or engineering, from what insights that you've gained with, all the assets that you're monitoring for O&M about to get the performance numbers or production that they're looking for?
We do. We really get involved or really get inquiries about budgeting, and that budgeting is not only for static annual maintenance inspection costs, but it's around how much additional budget should we have for corrective maintenance or corrective repairs? What amount of spares should we purchase as it relates to things like modules or inverters? And in larger systems, sometimes, some combiner boxes, if there's redundancy in transformers and other things. So, we're saying, hey, if you're going to spend a lot of time in procurement during the EP and C phase, let's think about that collective bargaining that you have right there to purchase some additional extras. Where are we going to store those relative to the site? Because if we need them, we want to have quick access to be able to deploy those back out in the field. And the other area too that kind of take our O&M knowledge for is in some of the design aspects and the means and methods. So as an example, most folks understand that string inverters do have around or up to around a 10-year lifespan. And within the first 10 years that it operates, that string inverter may need to be replaced. And that 10 years is kind of the average length of the warranty period. So knowing that you're going to operate the system for 20 plus years, you have to have a plan to replace that inverter. So installing it in a location that's accessible so that technicians can physically access it, lift it, remove it from where it is, get it to where it's got to go, get the new one in place. Those are design considerations that can be designed and installed into a project.
Yeah, that is really interesting. And I think, from your perspective, you could add so much value the earlier that you're involved in the process. So that's great to hear.
I love when folks reach out because I think, there is, when it comes to designing and building projects, right, the kind of guiding principle is the National Electrical Code, as it relates to the installation of the system. The National Electrical Code does not speak towards maintaining systems. It doesn't speak towards kind of the additional, kind of pushing things going up and above the minimum requirement that the National Electrical Code really establishes. So while things are compliant to the National Electrical Code and the inspector or the authority having jurisdiction would come and inspect it and pass it, it doesn't mean that it's going to last the 20 years that it's been designed to operate. And so that's where, our feedback loop from seeing things after 5, 10, 15, and now nearly 20 years of operating. And I've had the unique opportunity to see systems from when I very first started in the industry coming full circle and taking care of some of those systems, 15 plus years later. You can see how things stood up to time and broke down over time. And so you say, hey, listen, if you do it this way, you're probably going to be replacing it 10 years from now. If you do it that way, it's going to last that 20 years. And there are cost considerations that come into that. It's like the balance between value engineering and gold plating and understanding what things cost down the road to potentially remove or replace versus what they cost to install, plus the added benefit of having a lot of installation labor present, having more exposure to putting things in real time, also taking advantage of the tax credits on that labor and that material when it's being installed. Usually, I'll say probably in most cases, it makes sense to spend the extra money up front and save it from a operating expense and especially an unforeseen or unbudgeted operating expense if it does break down over time.
Yeah, that is great insights. And how much of the work that you actually do is O&M services, and what other services do you provide outside of that?
So about 90% of our work is O&M services, and that correlates with, the majority of the lifespan of the system is in that operating phase. So we have a number of long-term contracts where we take care of sites year over year. We perform the annual maintenance. If something happens, we're going out to troubleshoot, and then we do repairs. We also get involved with larger repairs or retrofits of projects, ranging from a few years old to, over 15 years old. The other services we perform are construction QC inspections and commissioning. So again, taking that learned experience, bringing that feedback loop into construction and getting ahead of some of those workmanship related issues that lead to some of those premature failures during the operating phase. Clients have us and our team of technicians come to the sites on larger builds. We'll visit the site periodically and do QC inspections. Sometimes we'll line those up with milestone inspections to show completeness and make sure the work is in conformance with the drawings and the best practices established for that client or the project standards. On smaller projects, we may just come in towards the end around mechanical completion, perform a very in-depth inspection. We'll come in also as a third party to commission the system. So really the inspection plus a number of systematic testing efforts that help us ensure the system is ready to safely be energized, place that system into service, and then once the system is operating, performing some of the operating testing and benchmarking around performance to initially set the operating benchmark into our O&M contracts.
Yeah, definitely. That's really interesting to know. And it's interesting to hear that it's not just O&M, that some of these other services that you provide. I know we've talked about this several times independently of the podcast, but can you talk about what is repowering of assets and what is like the opportunity with potentially repowering older PV assets?
Yeah, so repowering, it's used in different contexts, but I kind of look at it in falls under two camps. So you have repowering where a component, let's say the inverter fails and it's no longer commercially available, but the system is still in its financial prime, if you will. And so we need to come up with a solution to get that system back online. So that repowering effort is looking for current technology to introduce into a older asset and get it back to operational. And then you repowering in terms of upgrading or reinvigorating the system is the second use case I think of. And for our work in O&M, both cases exist. There's some great products out there now. I know SMA has a really strong inverter that allows you to integrate to some of the older DC voltages and different combinations of AC voltages to be able to bring some of those existing assets that are offline and the equipment's not available, get them back online. But I think there's a really interesting opportunity, as it relates in your world in project development to repower some of these older assets that may kind of get it to the end of their financial life, but there's still some useful life in that equipment and some of the project controls and documents that are in place.
Yeah, definitely. That's really interesting to hear. And that's interesting too, the example with the SMA inverter that's able to work with older technologies. Obviously, like everyone's talking about AI and not just, I feel like I'm just hearing about AI all the time. But can you talk about how AI has been incorporated into operations and maintenance of solar projects?
Yeah, it's certainly become a very useful tool. It's almost like one of the standard tools in your tool belt at this point. I find myself, especially if you're in the field and historically, if you didn't have the answer to something, you'd say, Google it. Now it's, chat GPT it. And it's amazing how these large language models are able to disseminate massive amounts of information and really give you the answers that you need in real time. So, I've seen our technicians in the field use it to identify, code-related questions that they may have, looking for information around equipment manufacturers. And that's just really kind of sourcing and finding information quickly, or using it just to find the resource in order to locate a manual or, a best practices. The other big area where I think there's the most headway for AI is around monitoring systems. And so, there's a massive amount of data that gets processed off of this sites that provide us almost too much information to be able to process in real time. And so you've got some very highly skilled individuals, performance analysts and performance engineers that are using outside software or processing this data to kind of see into it and use it to establish trends. And historically, predictive maintenance has been a bit of a mystery. And I think with the advancements in AI, it's becoming much, much more useful and gives you a platform to be able to make some very, very intelligent decisions based on historical data. As an example, if you're monitoring temperature inside of an inverter and you're also monitoring ambient temperature and you're monitoring the outputs and inputs to that inverter leading up to an event where an inverter fails, if you're noticing, it's a large exercise to look at all that data in parallel and say, okay, when this happens and it's at this temperature and under these conditions, this is what led to this failure. It takes an extreme amount of time and a very, very thoughtful individual to be able to process all that and understand what's variable, what's control, and establish and say, okay, this is what it looks like leading up to a failure. With AI and the ability to process all this information very, very quickly, you now have the tools to be able to have a system look into this data and anticipate those types of trends very, very fast. And with the human error component backed out of it, and now you're really looking and being able to look at results as opposed to establishing all the data and trends and models that you'd have to build from scratch. That's where I think O&M stands to benefit the most from AI. I also see some great things and have had some really, really fantastic conversations with my buddy Joel over at EcoSuite. He was showing me some of the advancements that they're making when it comes to energy storage, creating digital twins, being able to not only use those digital twins for analytics, but to run simulations on energy storage models. Battery technologies vary, their use cases vary. So when you ask somebody, hey, what's the best use case or what's the best battery out there? That's such an open-ended question. You have to really understand what conditions is this battery operating? What is its primary functions? What are its secondary functions? How is it going to be charged, discharged? In order to actually give a very informative answer there. Using AI and again, being able to process all this information, this allows you to run simulations very, very fast to say, of all the technology out there and use cases, this is how you should deploy it. This is what results you stand to see. So energy storage management, optimization, predictive maintenance, the data analytics, the reporting, tons and tons of opportunity with AI. I got to give one more shout out. We've been using SolarGrade as our reporting software, and James and David over there have just built a fantastic software. I had the distinct pleasure of working with them at a company, Clean Energy Associates, and they had a problem. They solved it with SolarGrade, and we use their software every day for all of our field reporting. Another advancement there is you're collecting tremendous amounts of photos, reporting issues, corrective actions over on some of the larger projects across 5 or 6 technicians, multiple days. These reports can end up being hundreds of pages long if you have all your photos incorporated. They've integrated AI into there to be able to generate quick executive summaries to know exactly what the most important things are to communicate to the system owner, to be able to turn that findings report into a punch list and action report and really work towards the solution, which is fixing the issues that are most important and most critical to the safety of the property, the equipment, and anyone working around there. And then next and close to that is the performance and output of that system. So again, another great example of, a company using AI to quickly improve the speed at which we communicate information.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I mean, I'm always surprised to hear how much innovation is happening within the industry, aspects of it. So I appreciate you sharing how AI is obviously changing O&M. And then obviously you talked about SolarGrid and EcoSuite as well. So I really appreciate that. And then it's interesting too, because I hear a lot about drones as well. Amazon using drones for delivery. Actually, the Wall Street Journal had an article about how Chick-fil-A is looking into using drones as well. Can you speak about how drones are being used in O&M?
Here in New Jersey, drones became very popular very quickly.
So about that.
Yeah, we deploy drones. We've been using drones for a couple of years now, especially when they're equipped with thermal cameras. The IR cameras mounted on the drones give us the opportunity to, fly over arrays that are operating, quickly see thermal irregularities in the solar panels, all the way down to the individual solar cells. So, as one of our means of being efficient in the field is before we do the annual maintenance inspection, or maybe before we visit a site for the very first time, deploying a drone to see if there's panels or strings of panels or even inverters that are not operating. And they show up as there's a pretty distinct thermal signature that you can see when you fly those over. And so by having that report, instead of just going out to look at everything, in addition to that, we can anticipate the extra time to know that we have to do some troubleshooting out there. So drones are, a critical part of maintenance. I also see drones being used very extensively on large ground mounts. So not only the thermal camera mounted to the drones, but they also have digital cameras. So when you're worried about soil erosion or vandalism, breaches in the fence, debris that may have ended up on site, illegal dumping. On rooftops, you might have clogged drains and massive amounts of water puddling and submerging PV equipment that shouldn't be. The digital image that's taken in parallel with the thermal image is very helpful to understand. And so if you're rolling a truck out there to perform a maintenance inspection, it's more critical to first go out there and troubleshoot and fix the issues that are out there, as opposed to re-report those and then give the report to the owner or the client and then say, yes, we have to come back out to fix those things. The main thing is to make sure that the system is operating safely and maximizing its output. So by deploying drones in advance of boots going on the ground, we're able to collect a lot of information very quickly, have it all at our fingertips, and our technicians are out there not only with drawings to navigate around the site and see how everything is electrically and physically connected, but they have that heat map, if you will, to be able to go and troubleshoot direct equipment, identify what the issue may be, and bring extra provisions to, their learned experience of what's the likely cause of a failure of a string outage. As an example, they're going to bring additional PV wire and connectors and wire management to be ready to anticipate how to correct that and get that back online.
Yeah, definitely. That is really interesting to hear about the incorporation of drones within O&M. Can you talk about what trends are you seeing in solar and as well as innovations in O&M?
It's funny, the O&M, I think we talked a lot about AI. I think that's probably the biggest trend in O&M right now, is the ability to process a lot of information, the ability to have access to a lot of information, right on the front line. Technicians in the field, they have access, they have more accessibility to information than they ever have with some of these AI tools. And then also in anticipation of technicians rolling out, folks that are the asset managers and the performance analysts that are looking at the historical data also are equipped with a lot more information to anticipate failures or potential issues that are happening in the field. The AI's influence on planning preparation is probably the biggest trend in O&M right now. I think the inspection software, again, shouting out Solar Grade, having tools in the field to collect a lot of photos. And it's funny because over the years, I've done a good job of collecting too much or sharing too much information in reports where a owner or an executive gets it and they're like, hey, how am I going to go through hundreds of pages? Like, I just need to know what I need to know. But if something goes wrong down the line, they're like, I need to see this exact picture. And so if you don't take and collect all that information, especially photo documenting existing conditions year over year, you might miss something, or you might, not have that piece of information to connect the dots to understand what happened and why it happened. So I never wanted to avoid collecting information, but certainly, was able to use software like Solar Grade to be able to collect that information and have it organize it in a way that is palatable by, an executive that may be reading a report that, it has a ton of other functions that needs to go through things quickly and understand, okay, what's the priority list, prioritize and execute. That's what we have to do. I think that's another trend. We are getting some really good software. We're not in the days of spreadsheets anymore. We're not in the days of collecting all the information and then technician needing to take Fridays off just to do their reports from, Monday or the previous week, filling out this information in real time and finishing a report by the end of the day to be able to review it and submit it the very next day. I know not everyone is there yet, but we certainly elevate that as one of our major points of differentiation, to be able to return reports very quickly, because that report is going to turn into the next order of business of troubleshooting or repairing or decision making that the owner is going to make for themselves, or they're going to consult us to help make the best decision. And so those advancements in O&M are great. General industry trends, I think there's good trends and bad trends. I tend to see the industry from my point of view, kind of Northeast Mid-Atlantic, very connected with kind of the technical blue collar portion of the industry. So, I recognize there's some difficult trends on labor shortage. There's definitely a need for new blood to come into the industry. I think most people recognize that the amount of blue-collar workers that are retiring versus the amount of blue-collar workers that are entering the industry is not proportional. And so that is a continuing challenge for a business like Triforce or an installation company, electrical contractors, technical reps for manufacturers and others. So, we're trying to think outside the box on getting more people in the industry, visiting technical schools, getting people excited about the industry, showing them the opportunity that this industry has, provided folks like you and I, showing them that there's a fantastic career path if they enter it and they put the work into it, they will get rewarded for sure. Maybe a very siloed, but an opportunity for me to vent is, technical support not trending in the right direction. Our team continues to report, waiting on hold for hours and hours, to just get a hold of somebody as part of the requirement to start a warranty replacement. There's no kind of way to circle around it. You have to engage with somebody at the manufacturer. You have to go through their process to qualify the warranty claim, and then you take it from there. So, that's a bit frustrating, especially when, we're out there and we know we have maybe an hour or two of work to process that warranty, but we're on hold for 3 hours. That's an area where I think manufacturers might want to put some extra attention into, because, selling product is one thing, but servicing it, what's going to keep folks coming back for more if they know, just the upfront cost is part of the decision making. But if they know the majority of their fleet is going to consist of their brand of components, if it's a battle, that 20 plus years down the road, it might change their decision-making process on who they're selecting. And, I think on some good trends, the domestic manufacturing component to the Inflation Reduction Act, I think is a great thing for, just for the United States, but also for the industry. Things are made here. We don't have to worry about shipping or challenges that come with logistics of traveling across oceans or communications in different languages, technical specifications. I got a very driver's seat point of view on this, working at Clean Energy Associates and technical teams overseas, communicating with technical teams domestically. There's a challenge. There's a language barrier. There's a time difference. So I think bringing manufacturing back here, service departments, refurbishing service departments will also, be part of that manufacturing process domestically. And then you're just seeing a lot of general expansion. I see that New Jersey is opening up a remote net metering component, which is really exciting. I think just, there's a lot of states that are really doubling down on the opportunity in the markets in solar. I think if the cost of capital gets a little bit more competitive, that, the money will start pushing a lot of these projects that may have been on hold over the past few years. We'll be in another boom phase of the solar coaster.
That's for sure. The solar coaster will always be there. It's just different things for sure.
It's always moving up. It goes up and down, but it's gradually moving up, right? I think, it's certainly grown over the last 15 plus years that I've been in the industry. It's come with its fair share of drops and growth, but overall it's continued to grow. It's an opportunity. If you want to put in the work and you have a plan and you put the effort into it, the sky is the limit in this industry.
Yeah, definitely. And going back to your point about that, the solar industry needs so many qualified and talented people, and it's still in the early stages. And this is going to be solar is the fastest growing energy source. And obviously there's a labor shortage, not just blue collar, but also, white collar as well. And obviously, I think they were saying like the average age of an electrician now in the US is like 48 years old.
Yeah.
Obviously, getting into the trades is very lucrative after maybe 2 years of a trading. So it's exciting times. Obviously, you talked about the Inflation Reduction Act, the domestic production adder as well, and states really pushing the way for renewables as well. And obviously, it's always exciting and always keeps us on our toes. And as you know, like the Solar Maverick podcast is about solar and entrepreneurship. We call our listeners Mavericks. You're already a solar maverick. What suggestion do you have for entrepreneurs? You started your business 3 years ago. Something that I think is interesting too, Chris, is like your dad had his own business, probably learned stuff from that. And then as well, like what gave you the confidence to start like 3 years ago? Obviously, you have a family and 3 kids, and sometimes it's harder. For someone like you, it's very easy to get a high-paying job in the renewable energy industry. Like, what made you make the move, and then also what suggestions do you have?
Yeah, I have 4 kids, so not to make it any easier. You know what? For me, I've had a ton of great opportunity. I've worked for, some great companies, great people, mentioned in CEA and PV Pros and Pure Power and Fister Energy. My career has continued from 2010 all the way through starting Triforce. I mean, it's been an upward projection. It kind of got to a point where, especially after, having kids, my oldest is 9 years old now. So, things definitely change when you have children. Your priorities change. It's not necessarily about, how much money you can make or, the prestige of the job you have, but you really start valuing the ability to enjoy your family, enjoy your personal time, and do something that really makes you happy. And in all cases, I thoroughly enjoyed all the steps in my career. I also enjoy a challenge. I think, for me personally, that as I was working the most recently in technical sales around field services and technical engineering and supply chain, I found myself, understanding enough to do my job very well and not having that challenge. And, folks that talk to me frequently here, I might be a little hoarse, right? So I spent yesterday coaching our youth wrestling program. So, my background, I wrestled Division I in college. I enjoy that. It was anyone who's wrestled understands that wrestling is the hardest sport out there. And so a challenge for me is part of my DNA that I enjoy. And, Triforce and kind of taking the leap from working for a company and starting Triforce Energy was exciting. And so that opportunity presented itself and was fortunate to get into it with my partner and be able to, use a lot of that lessons learned, a lot of the experience there and apply it. And also have a lot of really great relationships with people like you and many, many other folks out there in the industry, folks that I worked with in the past that have expanded their careers, and get their support to be able to kind of hit the ground and run with this idea. And, as we're talking about the labor shortage, I wasn't too proud to say I go from a nice, cushy office job to the next month being out there in the field, with work clothes and tools in my hand and dirt on my boots. That never crossed my mind as a step backwards. That crossed my mind is just, again, putting in the work and the effort required to achieve what we set out to do.
Yeah, definitely. That's really amazing to hear your story too. And what suggestions do you have for incorporated some suggestions, but do you have other suggestions that you want to talk about from your experience, 3 years of running Triforce Energy?
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to set a goal that is not money driven for yourself. That I think is really important because I think a lot of people look at starting their own business as an opportunity to make the most money that they can possibly make. And that's great. I think that's a good motivator, but you really have to start a business with the mindset of, doing it for the right reasons. For me, it's just something I found myself very passionate about. I saw the industry that I enjoy working in really needing more technical field service providers out there. And then I also see the opportunity when you have a business that you can incorporate the things that are important to you as core values of the business, understanding that, when you hire family, people with family, that their kids are going to have games and practices and events that are extremely important to them, just as I have with my kids and my family. Those are the things that matter. And, creating a business around that flexibility of making sure everyone can attend things that are very important, in an environment that they feel valued and appreciated in. Also challenging employees. I think most people want the opportunity to be challenged in a way that helps them improve their careers. So creating an environment that isn't just put someone in a position, do that job until they're tired of doing that job and then fill that position with the next person in line. I think you have to create a roadmap that allows people to develop professionally. And I think it wasn't just an idea that popped up overnight, right? There was a lot of planning and preparation. So you got to think fast and move slow sometimes. Patience can be a challenge. When you see an opportunity, sometimes you just got to take your time and really plan things out. That's really important.
Yeah, definitely. These are all great advice for entrepreneurs. And I appreciate you sharing your experience of 15 years in the solar renewable energy industry. I know we talked about this in the pre-interview. Can you talk about, books obviously are something that, I think is very important for personal development. You mentioned a book called Traction by Gino Wickman. I've actually never heard of this book. Can you talk about why you read this book every year?
Yeah, I enjoy it. So I got to confess, I'm more of an audiobook listener. It's hard with 4 young kids to sit down in the house and have everyone understand that you're reading something. It's hard to do. So I do find myself doing audiobooks in between driving to meetings or job sites. So Traction is a great book. I found it to be very useful. It helps put business into perspective when there's 100 things going on. I often find myself at some point every year, like things feel overwhelming. There's just a ton of things going on. You have to kind of hit reset. And when a vacation to warmer climate isn't in the mix, Traction's what I use to help me. It's a great book that covers kind of the key principles of managing and operating a business, what's most important to the business. It makes you think about what's happening now, what your vision is for the business, where you see yourself over time, focuses on the people in the organization. It's a really grounding book for business owners. So it's great if you're thinking about starting your own business. It's a must read. But if you're running a large organization or a large team within a business, or you are a business owner yourself, I think it's a really good book to help you kind of put things into perspective, give you some sound fundamentals to kind of rally up against and hit kind of the reset button and maybe break through, a challenging time.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited to read it, or I do as well. Listen to Audible all the time. So I'm excited to read it. I appreciate you sharing. This has been an amazing interview of the Solar Maverick podcast. I really appreciate Chris, you sharing your experiences. I know you mentioned you're going to be at RE Plus Boston. I think it's February 12th to 13th. What's the best way for our listeners who we call Mavericks to learn more about you or to keep in touch?
I appreciate that, Benoy. I hope you can find some time to get up there. I know you're traveling quite often, but certainly encourage if anyone's going to be attending RE Plus and would like to meet up to connect with me. LinkedIn is fantastic. I think that's the best way to connect. So finding me on LinkedIn, certainly follow Triforce Energy, our page, which, we try to put as much information as we can. Sometimes it's hard with everything else going on, but I do like to use that as our platform of choice to share information, to help others in the industry. Anyone that may have inspection, commissioning, or maintenance needs, Triforce would be a fantastic partner, and we appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. Feel free to email us at info@triforceenergy.com. That's TRIForceEnergy.com. I'll receive those emails and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Look forward to connecting with some of the new and existing Mavericks that are out there.
For sure. So who's the target companies that you like to speak to? Is it asset owners, or is it EPCs, or is it all of it? Or
most of our, asset owners are certainly will benefit from us with our majority of our O&M services. And that could be an asset owner that, works solely in the industry, that owns a lot of assets, in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, where, we would be a great partner for boots on the ground service for you in those areas. Even we service a lot of single system owners, commercial properties that have solar on their roof. Their primary function has nothing to do with solar. They just happen to have deployed solar either on their roof or in their parking lots or, adjacent locations on the ground. We are their go-to solar folks that take care of those assets. And then we do support EPCs and installers. We recognize not everyone can be everywhere at all times. So if you are responsible for the construction of a site and you're deploying subcontractors to build, if you have limited project management resources in our region or just bandwidth, we can be that field extension to be out in the field to make sure that the site is being built in accordance with your best practices, our working knowledge of PV installations and operating assets, as well as drawing compliance.
Yeah, that's amazing. I appreciate you telling us who your ideal customer is. On the notes of the podcast, we'll obviously have your contact information, Triforce Energy, also the RE Plus Boston, which is a really great conference, regional conference. That's CNCPA. have, which is February 12th to 13th in Boston. And also your suggestion on Traction by Gina Wickman, and obviously EcoSuite and Solar Grade, their websites as well, and obviously your bio. Thank you again, Chris. I really appreciate it. It's interesting because we become friends over time. First we meet as a personal relationship, then it's interesting how many close colleagues I've become very close friends with. And I consider you a friend, and keep up the great work. And I'm excited to hear the growth of Triforce Energy going forward.
Thank you, Benoy. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you. And you've built a fantastic platform to hear all these interesting stories and, people to share their unique aspects of the industry and entrepreneurship. I find your podcast my most frequently listened to. Keep doing what you're doing. You're sharing a lot of wealth of knowledge to the industry. And I certainly appreciate you and your friendship along the way. To many more years, my friend.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. To many more years, health and happiness. Thanks again, Chris.
All the best, Benoy. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Solar Maverick Podcast. The Solar Maverick Podcast is brought to you by Reneu Energy. We're a solar development and consulting firm. If you believe that this podcast is adding value to you, please give us a 5-star review and share with those that you think could benefit from this information. Please email all questions, suggestions, and feedback to info@reneuenergy.com. That's info@reneuenergy.com. The Solar Maverick Podcast is produced by Podcast Laundry and executive produced by Benoy Thanjan and Kevin Y. Brown.